He thought he was just helping a stranger on a rainy night. But when the woman in the ruined dress looked him in the eye, she whispered something that would change his life forever. She wasn't just a CEO. She carried a guilt so heavy, it reached into his past. A secret that tied her to the wife he lost, and the pain he never forgave. As small-town gossip turns vicious and the truth begins to unravel, when your second chance at happiness comes from the person who destroyed your first, do you take it or walk away forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The windshield wipers squeaked across the glass, fighting against the relentless rain. Jack Harper gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup truck, his thoughts drifting to Emma waiting at home. He'd promised her leftover spaghetti tonight. Not exactly a gourmet meal, but it was the best he could manage after pulling double shifts this week. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating sheets of rain. It was the kind of night when most folks in Willow Creek stayed inside, watching TV or playing board games. The kind of night that made him miss Sarah most. She'd always loved the sound of rain on their tin roof. Something caught his eye, a flash of pale blue fabric against the wet asphalt. At first, he thought it might be a piece of trash blown by the wind, but then he saw it move. A woman stumbled along the shoulder of the road, one hand clutching what looked like designer heels, the other wrapped around herself. Jack's first instinct was to keep driving. In a small town like Willow Creek, getting involved usually meant inviting trouble. But Sarah's voice echoed in his head. The right thing and the easy thing are rarely the same thing, Jack Harper. Sighing, he eased the truck onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. The woman didn't even seem to notice his approach. He rolled down his passenger window. "Ma'am, are you all right out there?" She turned, and Jack's eyebrows shot up. Even in the dim light, he could tell her dress probably cost more than his monthly salary. Her makeup was smeared, dark streaks running down her cheeks, though whether from rain or tears, he couldn't tell. "I'm perfectly fine," she said, her words slurring together. She took an unsteady step and nearly pitched forward onto the pavement. "Just taking a lovely evening stroll." "In this weather, without shoes?" She glanced down at her bare feet, as if just noticing them. "Oh, yes. Well, these Jimmy Choos weren't made for walking." She waggled the expensive-looking shoes in her hand, almost losing her balance again. Jack took a deep breath. "Look, you clearly need help. At least let me drive you somewhere safe." She squinted at him through the rain. "Are you a serial killer?" Despite everything, Jack felt his mouth twitch. "No, ma'am. Just a hardware store manager who's going to feel guilty if he leaves a lady out in weather like this?" She considered this for a long moment, swaying slightly. "I suppose serial killers don't usually work at hardware stores." She fumbled with the door handle, eventually managing to pull it open. "I'm Vivian," she announced as she collapsed into the passenger seat. "Vivian Clark, and I'm not drunk. Well, not entirely, maybe a little." She paused. "Okay. Significantly." Jack reached behind the seat and pulled out an old work coat. "Here, you're shivering." She wrapped herself in the coat, her designer dress a strange contrast against the worn canvas. "You smell like wood shavings," she mumbled, burying her nose in the collar. "Hazard of the job." Jack pulled back onto the road. "There's a diner up ahead. Only place still open this time of night. Let's get some coffee in you." "Coffee won't fix anything," she said quietly, her voice suddenly heavy with something that wasn't just alcohol. "Nothing fixes some things." They drove in silence for a few minutes, the wipers keeping their steady rhythm. The neon signs of May's all-night diner came into view, a beacon in the stormy darkness. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh after the dim evening. The waitress, Betty, raised an eyebrow at Jack, but didn't comment on his unusual companion. She just brought 2 cups of coffee and retreated behind the counter, pretending not to watch them. Vivian wrapped her manicured hands around the mug, staring into its depths, as if it held answers to questions Jack couldn't guess at. Her designer dress was ruined, the pale blue fabric water-stained and muddy at the hem. "Want to talk about it?" Jack asked. not sure why he was getting involved, but unable to ignore the raw pain evident in her face. She laughed, a hollow sound that held no humor. About what? About how I destroyed lives with a signature? About how I convinced myself it was just business? She took a shaky breath. There are mistakes you can't fix with an apology or a check or a resignation letter. Jack stayed quiet, letting her talk. Sometimes that was all a person needed. I didn't know, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what would happen. Or maybe I did, and just didn't want to see it. It's funny how clarity comes way too late to do any good. She took a sip of coffee, grimacing at either the taste or her thoughts. Do you believe in karma, mister? Harper, Jack Harper. And I believe we all have to live with our choices. Something flickered across her face. Recognition? Fear? But it was gone too quickly to read. The Lakeshore Inn, she said abruptly. That's where I'm staying, if you could? Of course. Jack left enough cash on the table to cover the coffee and a generous tip for Betty, who'd be talking about this for weeks. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle by the time they pulled up to the inn. It was the fanciest place in Willow Creek, though that wasn't saying much. Vivian clutched her purse, still wearing his coat. Thank you, she said softly, not meeting his eyes. For stopping, for the coffee, for... She trailed off, then pushed open the door and slipped out into the night. Jack watched her disappear through the inn's front door, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the polished floor. He sat there for a moment, thinking about mistakes and redemption and the weight of choices we can't take back. Then he put the truck in gear and headed home to Emma and leftover spaghetti, trying to shake the feeling that this wasn't the last he'd see of Vivian Clark. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Jack flipped pancakes on the griddle. The familiar routine helped push away thoughts of last night's strange encounter, but they kept creeping back. The sophisticated woman in the ruined dress, stumbling in the rain, haunted him. Dad, you're burning that one! Emma's voice snapped him back to reality. He quickly rescued the pancake, adding it to the stack. Just giving it extra color, kiddo. Emma rolled her eyes but grinned, her dark hair falling in her face as she sketched in her notebook. She always drew while eating breakfast, said it helped her wake up properly. This morning's subject appeared to be their elderly neighbor's cat sleeping on the fence. You seem distracted, she said, not looking up from her drawing. Did something happen at work? Jack poured more batter onto the griddle. Nothing important, just a long night. He didn't mention helping the drunk woman. Emma worried about him enough already. After dropping Emma at school, Jack tackled the broken fence panel in their backyard. The winter storms had done a number on it, and he'd been putting off repairs for weeks. The physical work helped clear his head, the familiar rhythm of hammer and nails grounding him in the present. The rumble of an engine drew his attention. A black luxury car that looked completely out of place in their modest neighborhood rolled to a stop in front of his house. Jack straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. The car door opened, and a woman stepped out. The same woman from last night, though she looked like a completely different person. Gone was the disheveled dress and smeared makeup. Instead, she wore a perfectly tailored charcoal business suit and heels that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, and her makeup was flawless. She approached the fence with measured steps, her posture straight as a ruler. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice clear and professional, nothing like the slurred words from last night. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Just fixing the fence," Jack said, suddenly very aware of his worn work clothes and paint-stained boots. "I wanted to thank you properly for your assistance last night." Her cheeks colored slightly. "I was not at my best." "No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true." She reached into her designer purse and withdrew a small leather card holder. "I'm Vivian Clark, CEO of Meridian Technologies." She handed him a heavy cream-colored business card with elegant raised lettering. Jack accepted it automatically, though he had no idea what he'd do with such a fancy card. He was about to respond when something caught Vivian's eye. She went completely still, staring at something behind him. Jack turned to see what had captured her attention. Emma's bike leaned against the porch, her school backpack hanging from the handlebars. The morning sun caught the silver locket dangling from the zipper, Sarah's locket, which Emma had begged to borrow for a class presentation. "That locket," Vivian said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you get it?" "It belonged to my wife, Sarah." Jack's protective instincts stirred at the intensity of Vivian's gaze. "She passed away 5 years ago." "Sarah." Vivian's perfectly composed facade cracked. "Sarah Harper? She worked in accounting at Preston Financial about 15 years ago?" Jack's hammer slipped from his fingers, hitting the grass with a dull thud. "You knew Sarah?" "We worked together." Vivian's hand trembled slightly as she reached toward the locket but stopped short of touching it. She had that locket even then. Said it was a family heirloom. It was her grandmother's. Jack studied Vivian's face more carefully now. She never mentioned knowing anyone named Vivian Clark. "I wasn't Clark then. I was just Vivian Reynolds, a junior executive." Something flickered across her face. Pain? Guilt? It was gone too quickly to read. "Sarah was. She was kind to me when very few people were." The professional mask slipped back into place so quickly Jack almost wondered if he'd imagined its absence. Vivian took a step back, smoothing her already perfect jacket. "I should go. I have a board meeting." She turned toward her car, then paused. "We should talk again, Mr. Harper, about Sarah, if you're willing." Before Jack could respond, she was sliding into the back seat of her luxury car. The tinted windows hid her from view as the vehicle pulled away, leaving Jack standing by his half-fixed fence with more questions than answers. He picked up his hammer, staring at the spot where Vivian's car had been. Sarah had worked at Preston Financial during their first years of marriage, before Emma was born. She'd never said much about why she left, just that there had been layoffs. They'd struggled financially afterward, but Sarah had always insisted things happened for a reason. Now he wondered what else she might not have told him about those years, and why the sight of her locket had affected Vivian Clark so strongly. The memory of Vivian's words from last night echoed in his mind. "There are mistakes you can't fix with an apology or a check or a resignation letter." He had a feeling he was about to find out exactly what she'd meant by that. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets of Willow Creek as Jack walked home from Anderson's auto shop. His work shirt was stained with grease, and his mind wandered to Vivian's strange behavior that morning. The way she had stared at Emma's locket, as if seeing a ghost, bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He turned onto Cedar Lane, his boots scuffing against the worn sidewalk. The familiar sight of his modest 2-story house came into view, and then he stopped short. There, perched on his front porch steps, sat Vivian Clark. She looked different from this morning, more subdued in dark slacks and a simple blouse, her elegant posture at odds with the weathered wood steps. A silver thermos sat beside her. Jack's chest tightened. He considered turning around, but she had already spotted him. "Mr. Harper," she called softly, standing up and smoothing her pants. "I hope you don't mind. I brought coffee." He approached slowly, keys jingling in his hand. "Miss Clark, twice in one day, that's quite a coincidence." "Not a coincidence," she admitted. "I've been trying to work up the courage to have this conversation for a very long time." Jack studied her face. The polished CEO from this morning was gone, replaced by someone who looked afraid. He gestured to the porch swing. "Emma's at her art club until 5. We can talk here." Vivian nodded gratefully and poured 2 cups of coffee from the thermos. The rich aroma filled the air as she handed him one. They sat, the old swing creaking beneath them. Sarah was special, Vivian began suddenly, staring into her cup. Everyone at Maxwell Corp loved her. She had this way of making even the cleaning staff feel important. Jack's hand tightened around his mug. "You said you knew her." "I did. We worked together for 3 years in marketing." Vivian's voice grew quiet. "She was the only person who treated me like a normal human being, not just the ambitious ice queen climbing the corporate ladder." "Sarah had that effect on people," Jack said, memories of his wife's warm smile washing over him. She helped me through my divorce, you know. Brought me soup when I was sick. Listened without judging. Vivian's hands trembled slightly. And I. She swallowed hard. I repaid her kindness by destroying her career. The words hung in the air like smoke. Jack set his coffee down with deliberate care. What are you talking about? 8 years ago, when Maxwell Corp was struggling, the board demanded cuts. As the new VP of operations, I had to reduce staff by 30%. Vivian's voice cracked. I could have protected her department. I could have found another way. But I was so focused on proving myself, on showing I could make the tough calls. Jack stood up abruptly, the swing shuddering. You're saying you fired my wife? I approved the restructuring that eliminated her entire division. Vivian's eyes glistened. Sarah was one of 60 people who lost their jobs that day. I told myself it was just business, that I couldn't play favorites. But the truth is, I was a coward. Jack paced the small porch, his mind racing. After losing that job, Sarah had struggled to find work. The stress had worn her down, made her vulnerable when the illness came. They'd burned through their savings on medical bills. Why are you telling me this now? He demanded. Because I've carried this guilt for years, Vivian said, watching Sarah's struggle from afar, hearing about her illness. Knowing I helped set those dominoes in motion. She stood, wiping her eyes. When I saw you last night, then Emma's locket this morning, I knew I couldn't hide from it anymore. You deserve to know the truth. Jack braced his hands against the porch railing, knuckles white. Part of him wanted to scream at her, to blame her for everything that followed that layoff. But Sarah's voice whispered in his memory. Hate only hurts the person carrying it, Jack. I was wrong. Vivian continued softly. I've spent years trying to make up for it through charitable foundations, scholarship programs, but I know nothing can undo what happened. Jack turned to face her. The setting sun painted her features in harsh relief, highlighting the anguish in her expression. Did Sarah know that you were involved in the decision? No, Vivian whispered. I never had the courage to tell her. Another failure on my part. They stood in heavy silence as shadows lengthened across the porch. Finally, Vivian gathered her thermos and coffee cups. There's more you should know, she said, but not today. When the time is right. The neon sign of Mary's Diner cast a warm pink glow through the window where Jack and Emma sat at their usual booth. The vinyl seats squeaked as Emma fidgeted, pushing around the last few fries on her plate. It was their weekly Wednesday dinner tradition, a small luxury Jack maintained, even when money was tight. Dad, can I get the cherry pie? Emma asked, her blue eyes hopeful. Mary said she just baked it fresh today. Jack smiled, mentally calculating his wallet's contents. Sure, sweetheart, you earned it with that math test. The bell above the door chimed, and Jack's stomach dropped as Vivian Clark stepped inside. She wore casual clothes, a simple sweater and dark jeans, but still managed to look elegant. Several diners turned to stare, probably recognizing her from news coverage. Emma noticed his tension. Dad, what's wrong? Before he could respond, Emma spotted Vivian. Oh, isn't that the lady from yesterday? The one you helped? Vivian had already seen them. She hesitated by the door, as if debating whether to leave, but Emma waved enthusiastically. Hi, would you like to sit with us? Emma called out, ignoring Jack's gentle headshake. Vivian approached their table slowly. I wouldn't want to intrude on your family dinner. Please join us. Emma scooted over, patting the vinyl seat beside her. We're getting cherry pie. Have you tried Mary's cherry pie? It's the best in town. Jack watched his daughter's natural friendliness, so much like her mother's, break through Vivian's careful composure. A genuine smile softened Vivian's features. Well, if you're sure. Vivian glanced at Jack, seeking permission. He nodded stiffly. Please. As Vivian settled in, Mary hustled over with 3 slices of pie and fresh coffee. On the house for my favorite customers. And their guest. The first few minutes passed in awkward silence, broken only by the clink of forks against plates. Emma, ever the icebreaker, spoke up. So, you knew my mom? Vivian set down her fork carefully. I did. We worked together at Palmer Industries before. She paused, glancing at Jack. Before a lot of things changed. What was she like at work? Emma leaned forward eagerly. Dad tells me stories, but I love hearing new ones. She was. Vivian's voice softened. She was kind. The sort of person who remembered everyone's birthday, who'd stay late to help others finish their projects. She kept a drawer full of snacks for anyone who skipped lunch. Jack watched Emma drink in every detail, knowing how precious these glimpses of Sarah were to her. I didn't start out in the executive suite, you know, Vivian continued, stirring her coffee. I grew up in a trailer park in Ohio. My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Emma's eyes widened. Really? But you seem so fancy? Vivian laughed quietly. I learned to fake it. Worked my way through college as a waitress, not nearly as good as Mary here. Took every opportunity, fought for every promotion. I thought success meant never looking back, never letting anyone see where I came from. She took a sip of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. But sometimes, when you're climbing so fast, you don't see who you're stepping on. You tell yourself it's just business, just numbers on a spreadsheet. Until one day, you realize those numbers have names, faces, families. Jack felt his anger softening despite himself, recognizing the weight of genuine regret in her voice. But you made it, Emma said. You're successful now. Success isn't just about money or power, Vivian replied. That's something I'm learning very late in life. She turned to Emma. Speaking of success, I've seen your artwork at the library. The watercolor series about changing seasons? It's remarkable. Emma blushed. You've seen those? They're just practice pieces. They show real talent, Vivian said firmly. The way you capture light, the emotional quality of your brushwork, it's sophisticated work for any age, let alone 14. Jack watched his daughter's face light up at the praise. Emma didn't often hear feedback from anyone with art knowledge. Their small town didn't have many outlets for artistic pursuits. Actually, Vivian continued, reaching for her purse, I wanted to mention something. I serve on the board of the Westwood Academy of Arts. They have an exceptional summer program for young artists, and their full-time high school program is one of the best in the country. She pulled out a glossy brochure and handed it to Emma, whose eyes grew wide as she flipped through the pages. Oh, my gosh, Emma breathed. I've read about this place online. Their graduates go on to amazing art schools. The summer program would be a wonderful way to test the waters, Vivian said. And I'd be happy to write a recommendation letter. The connections I have there could really open doors for someone with your talent. Jack felt his chest tighten. He knew what Westwood cost. He'd seen Emma looking at their website late at night. The tuition was more than he made in a year. That's very generous, he said quietly. But there are scholarships, Vivian added quickly, reading his expression. Full scholarships for exceptional students, which Emma clearly is. Emma clutched the brochure to her chest, looking between her father and Vivian with hope shining in her eyes. Vivian stood up, leaving a $50 bill on the table despite the pie being free. Think about it. No pressure, no strings attached. Just an opportunity I'd like to help make possible. She smiled at Emma. Keep painting, sweetheart. You have a gift. Jack watched her walk away, the bell chiming as she left. Emma was already absorbed in the brochure, pointing out details about the art studios and specialized classes. His daughter's excitement was palpable and terrifying. He stared down at his empty coffee cup, unsure what to think or feel about Vivian Clark's offer. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Jack shuffled to the front door in his worn slippers, ready to grab the newspaper. A cream-colored envelope caught his eye, tucked halfway under the welcome mat. His name was written in elegant script across the front. Inside, he found expensive stationery with the Westwood Academy of Arts letterhead. His hands trembled slightly as he read, Dear Mr. Harper, following our recent conversations, I would like to formally offer my sponsorship for Emma's full tuition at Westwood Academy of Arts. The Academy's reputation for nurturing young artistic talent is unparalleled, and Emma's gift deserves such an opportunity. Jack sank into his favorite armchair, the letter heavy in his hands. The amount listed made his head spin, more money than he'd make in 5 years. "Dad?" Emma appeared in her pajamas, hair still messy from sleep. "What's that?" He tried to tuck the letter away, but she'd already spotted it. "Nothing, sweetheart, just some mail." "Is that the Westwood logo?" Her eyes widened. She'd been collecting their brochures for months, dreaming impossible dreams. "Dad, please, what is it?" Jack sighed, patting the ottoman beside him. "Sit down, Em." She perched next to him, practically vibrating with curiosity as he handed her the letter. Her eyes grew wider with each line she read. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Dad, this is everything. My whole future." She looked up at him, face glowing. Then she saw his expression. "You don't look happy." "It's complicated, sweetheart." "Because it's from Ms. Clark?" Emma's voice grew quiet. "Because of what happened with Mom?" Jack ran a hand through his graying hair. "You're too smart sometimes, you know that?" "But Dad, this is Westwood, the best art school in 3 states. You've seen how hard I've worked. All those extra art classes, the summer workshops." "I know, baby. I know how much you want this." "Then why can't we just say yes?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Mom would want me to go. You know she would." Jack's chest tightened. Sarah had always been Emma's biggest cheerleader, spending hours helping her develop her talent, even when they could barely afford art supplies. "Your mother wanted everything good for you," he said carefully. "But she also taught us about pride and self-respect." "Is that what this is about? Pride?" Emma stood up, hands on her hips in a pose so like her mother it made his heart ache. "Or is it about forgiveness?" Before Jack could respond, a knock at the door made them both jump. Through the window, he could see Vivian's black car parked in the driveway. "Emma, go get dressed," he said quietly. "We'll talk more later." He opened the door to find Vivian looking fresh and professional in a pale blue blazer. "Good morning, Jack. I assume you received my letter?" He nodded stiffly, stepping aside to let her in. They moved to the kitchen, where morning sunlight sparkled off the clean dishes Emma had washed the night before. "Coffee?" he offered automatically. "No, thank you." Vivian settled at the small kitchen table. "I wanted to discuss the details of the sponsorship in person. The fall semester begins in August, so there's paperwork to complete." "Why are you doing this?" Jack interrupted, his voice tight. Vivian blinked. "I'm sorry?" "This generous offer." He nearly spat the words. "Is it guilt money? Trying to buy your way out of what happened?" "Jack, because Sarah lost more than just a job when your company downsized. She lost her health insurance. Do you know what that meant? We couldn't afford her regular checkups. By the time we caught the cancer..." His voice broke. Vivian's face had gone pale. "I didn't know, Jack. I swear I didn't know about her illness." "No, you wouldn't have. You were too busy climbing the corporate ladder, making those tough decisions that looked good on quarterly reports." "That's not fair," Vivian said quietly. "You don't know everything about those times." "I know enough. I know Sarah came home crying that day. I know she blamed herself, thought she must have done something wrong. I know she spent months searching for new work while her health declined." Jack's hands gripped the back of a kitchen chair. "And now you show up with your checkbook, thinking you can make it all better?" "No." Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. "Nothing can make that better. But Emma has a gift, a real gift. The kind that could take her anywhere she dreams of going." She met his eyes steadily. "Sarah would want that for her daughter." "Don't you dare tell me what Sarah would want." "Then ask yourself. Really ask yourself, Jack. What would Sarah want for Emma in this moment?" Jack closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's last weeks in the hospital. How she'd made him promise to keep encouraging Emma's art, no matter what. How she'd said, "Don't let my going away steal her dreams, too." Vivian stood slowly. "I know you don't trust my motives, but sometimes." She paused at the kitchen door. Sometimes God puts us in each other's path to make things right. Then she was gone, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts, and the weight of two futures balanced in his hands. Jack pushed his cart down the cereal aisle of Wilson's Market, mentally calculating how to stretch his paycheck. The familiar fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he reached for Emma's favorite breakfast cereal. A conversation from the next aisle over drifted through the shelves. "Did you hear about that CEO staying at the lakeshore?" Mrs. Peterson's voice carried clearly. "Vivian Clark. My sister in Boston says she's bad news." Jack's hand froze mid-reach. He pretended to study the nutrition label while listening. "Oh, I know all about her," Betty Thompson chimed in. "My son works in finance. Says she's known for hostile takeovers. Ruins small companies for profit. There was this huge scandal a few years back. Something about insider trading? And now she's hanging around the Harper girl," Mrs. Peterson added. "Poor Jack should be careful. That woman's probably up to something." Jack's jaw tightened. He grabbed the cereal and moved quickly toward the checkout, but not before catching more snippets. Ruthless in the boardroom. Destroyed entire communities. Never trusted those corporate types. The drive home felt longer than usual. Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as doubts crept in. What did he really know about Vivian Clark? Sure, she seemed genuinely remorseful about Sarah, but her reputation told a different story. The thought of Emma getting hurt made his stomach churn. He pulled into their gravel driveway, gathering the grocery bags. The screen door creaked as he entered the kitchen. "Dad, perfect timing," Emma called from the living room. "Come see what I just finished." Jack set the bags on the counter and followed her voice. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, her sketchbook open before her. Colored pencils were scattered around like fallen autumn leaves. "It's Miss Clark," Emma said proudly, holding up the drawing. "From memory." Jack's breath caught. The portrait was stunning in its detail classic Emma magic. She had captured Vivian's elegant features perfectly. The high cheekbones, the carefully styled hair, the hint of a smile. But what struck him most were the eyes. Emma had drawn them with remarkable depth, reflecting a profound sadness he'd glimpsed himself that first night at the diner. "Look how she's kind of looking down and away," Emma explained, pointing with her pencil. "I notice she does that sometimes, when she thinks no one's watching, like she's carrying something heavy inside." Jack sat beside his daughter on the old carpet, studying the drawing. Emma had always been perceptive, seeing past surfaces to capture the essence of things, just like her mother. "You've really got a gift, sweetheart," he said softly. "Miss Clark says the same thing. She showed me some techniques yesterday when she stopped by the library." Emma gathered her pencils, carefully arranging them by color. "Did you know she used to draw too, before she got busy with business stuff? She said sometimes she misses it." Jack's chest tightened. Every interaction between Vivian and Emma seemed genuine, filled with real connection. But those whispered conversations at the grocery store echoed in his mind. "Emma," he started carefully, "what do you think about Miss Clark? Really think, I mean." Emma considered this, absently twirling a blue pencil. "I think she's lonely," she said finally. "And maybe a little scared, even though she tries to hide it. But she's nice, Dad. Not fake nice like Mrs. Peterson when she brings us casseroles. Real nice." Jack helped Emma clean up her art supplies, her words turning over in his mind. After dinner and homework, he sent her to bed with a hug and a reminder about her dentist appointment tomorrow. The house grew quiet. Jack sat at the kitchen table, where the sponsorship letter lay precisely where he'd left it days ago. The paper felt expensive between his fingers as he read it again in the dim light. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward midnight. Jack rubbed his tired eyes, but sleep felt impossible. The letter's words blurred together as his thoughts churned. He thought about Sarah, about her layoff and the struggles that followed, about Emma's incredible talent and the opportunities she deserved, about Vivian's complex past and apparent desire for redemption, about trust and risk and second chances. The sponsorship letter sat silent on the table, offering both opportunity and uncertainty. Jack stared at it, feeling the weight of the decision press down on him as the night grew deeper. Outside, crickets chirped their endless song. The old house creaked and settled. Jack remained at the kitchen table, turning possibilities over in his mind like worn coins, searching for answers in the quiet dark. The morning sun cast long shadows across Jack's driveway as he watched Emma bounce excitedly on her toes. She clutched her worn sketchbook to her chest, her backpack stuffed with extra pencils and her favorite charcoals. Jack couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm, even as worry gnawed at his stomach. Vivian's silver Mercedes pulled up right on time, gleaming in the early light. She stepped out wearing casual close-dark jeans and a simple sweater looking different from her usual corporate armor. "Good morning," she called, waving to Emma, who practically sprinted to the car. "Remember, you stay with us the whole time," Jack reminded Emma, following at a more measured pace. He'd spent half the night debating this decision. "I know, Dad," Emma said, rolling her eyes but smiling. "You've only told me like 20 times." The drive into the city took just over an hour. Emma filled the time with questions about the galleries they'd visit, while Vivian patiently explained about different art movements and styles. Jack watched them interact through the rearview mirror, noting how Vivian never talked down to Emma, treating her questions with genuine respect. Their first stop was the Modern Art Center, a sleek building of glass and steel. Emma's eyes went wide as they walked through the entrance, taking in the soaring ceilings and massive installations. "This is amazing," she whispered, already pulling out her sketchbook. Jack hung back slightly, hands in his pockets, feeling out of place among the well-dressed art patrons. But Vivian seemed to sense his discomfort, quietly explaining pieces in a way that made them more accessible. She pointed out a large abstract painting, explaining how the artist had used color to create emotion. "See how the blues and grays swirl together?" she said, including both Emma and Jack in the conversation. "It reminds me of that storm we had last week." Emma nodded eagerly. "And look at how the yellow breaks through, like sunshine after rain." Jack found himself drawn into their discussions, surprised by how much he began to enjoy seeing the art through their eyes. By the third gallery, he was offering his own observations, making Emma beam with pride when he correctly identified a Renaissance influence in one of the paintings. At lunch, they found a small cafe with outdoor seating. Emma couldn't stop talking about a series of portraits they'd seen, her hands moving animatedly as she described the techniques she wanted to try. Vivian listened intently, offering suggestions about materials and methods. "You know," Vivian said, watching Emma sketch on her paper napkin, "I used to draw when I was about your age." "Really?" Emma looked up, interested. "Why did you stop?" A shadow crossed Vivian's face. "Life got busy. I started focusing on more practical things." She smiled sadly. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice." Jack found himself studying her expression, seeing past the polished exterior to something more vulnerable. It reminded him of Sarah, who'd always said that everyone deserved a chance to rewrite their story. The afternoon took them to smaller, more intimate galleries. In one, they discovered a student exhibition that had Emma transfixed. The young artists were only a few years older than her, their work raw and full of passion. "This could be you someday," Vivian said softly to Emma, who was sketching furiously in her book, trying to capture the technique of one particular piece. Jack watched them standing together, Vivian pointing out details in the artwork while Emma nodded eagerly. There was something natural in their interaction, a genuine warmth that made his earlier suspicions feel heavy in his chest. By the time they headed home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Emma, exhausted from the day's excitement, fell asleep in the back seat, her sketchbook still open on her lap. The car hummed quietly as Vivian drove through the darkening evening. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, she spoke softly, careful not to wake Emma. "Thank you for today, Jack, for giving me a chance." Jack looked out at the passing landscape. Emma had a wonderful time. "I meant what I said before about making things right," Vivian continued. "I know I can't change the past, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've learned that faith isn't just about believing in God. It's about believing people can change." Jack turned to study her profile in the dim light. "Sarah used to say something similar," he admitted. She believed everyone deserved grace. She was right. Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. Some days, grace is the only thing that keeps us going. They fell into another silence, but it felt different now, lighter, like the first breath of spring after a long winter. In the back seat, Emma mumbled something in her sleep, her sketchbook sliding slightly. Jack reached back to steady it, catching glimpses of the day's drawings, quick sketches of art they'd seen, but also one of Vivian pointing out details in a painting, her expression animated and kind. The highway stretched before them, streetlights creating pools of gold in the growing darkness. Jack found himself thinking about Sarah, about faith, about the mysterious ways life sometimes offered second chances. The quiet hum of the engine and Emma's soft breathing created a peaceful backdrop for his thoughts. "Sometimes," he said finally, "I think the hardest part of faith is trusting that good can come from painful things." Vivian nodded, her hands steady on the steering wheel. "And sometimes," she replied, "the greatest act of faith is simply being willing to try again." The small bell above Molly's diner jingled as Jack pushed open the door, the familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked pie welcoming him inside. Vivian had called earlier, asking to meet about Emma's application. She sat in a corner booth, a manila envelope, and her usual sleek leather portfolio placed neatly on the worn tabletop. "Thanks for coming," Vivian said, smoothing her silk blouse as Jack slid into the booth across from her. Her fingers tapped nervously on the envelope. "The application deadline for Westwood is in 2 weeks. I know it's a big decision, but Emma's portfolio needs to be submitted soon if she wants a chance at fall admission." Martha, the weathered waitress who'd served Jack his morning coffee for 15 years, shuffled over with her notepad. "The usual, Jack?" she asked, her pen hovering above the paper. "Please." Jack nodded, then gestured to Vivian. "Ladies first." "Just green tea, thank you," Vivian said with a warm smile that Martha returned somewhat stiffly. News traveled fast in small towns, and Vivian's presence had been the subject of much gossip lately. When Martha moved away, Vivian pulled out several papers from the envelope. "I've prepared everything Emma would need. The recommendation letters, the financial documentation, even some examples of successful portfolios from previous applicants." Her voice carried a gentle urgency. "She has such raw talent, Jack. This could change her whole future." Jack studied the papers, his calloused fingers careful not to smudge the pristine forms. The tuition figures made his head spin, more money than he'd make in 5 years. But Vivian's offer would cover it all, plus room and board. It was the opportunity of a lifetime for Emma. "I've been thinking about it a lot," Jack admitted, looking up to meet Vivian's hopeful gaze. "Emma hasn't talked about anything else since the art show." And seeing her there, how her eyes lit up. He paused as Martha returned with their drinks. Vivian wrapped her hands around her teacup, waiting patiently as Jack stirred sugar into his coffee. "I know I have a lot to make up for," she said softly. "But this isn't about me or my guilt. It's about Emma." Jack nodded slowly, his resistance beginning to crumble. "You're right, and maybe it's time Well, if it isn't Vivian Clark herself." The harsh voice cut through their conversation like a knife. A man stood by their table, his face flushed with anger or drink, maybe both. His clothes were worn but clean, the kind of outfit Jack recognized from his regulars at the hardware store. "Mr. Peterson," Vivian said quietly, recognition flickering across her face. "You remember me then?" Peterson's laugh was bitter. "Surprised you can keep track of all the small businesses you've destroyed." Jack watched Vivian's shoulders tense, though her expression remained carefully neutral. Other diners had gone quiet, their attention drawn to the confrontation. "That was a complicated situation, Mr. Peterson," Vivian said. "If you'd like to discuss it, we can do so privately." "Privately?" Peterson's voice rose. "Like how you privately decided to cancel our contract? 3 generations of my family built that company, and you killed it with one signature." He planted his hands on their table, making the cups rattle. "My father died thinking he'd failed the business. My kids had to change schools. But I bet you slept just fine in your mansion, didn't you?" Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the weight of other patrons' stares pressing in on them. This was exactly what he'd feared. The complicated past Vivian carried with her. The ripples of pain from her corporate decisions. "That's enough," Martha said firmly, approaching their table. "This is a family establishment, Mr. Peterson." Peterson straightened up, adjusting his jacket with shaking hands. "Family? Ask her about family values," he pointed at Vivian. "She wouldn't know them if they bid her on her designer." "Outside," Martha interrupted, gesturing toward the door. "Now." As Martha escorted the angry man out, an uncomfortable silence hung over the diner. Vivian sat perfectly still, her tea untouched, her face a mask of composure that didn't quite hide the pain in her eyes. "I should have mentioned the Peterson manufacturing situation," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was 7 years ago. The company was already struggling when they came to us for help. The contract cancellation was just the final blow." Jack stared into his coffee cup, his earlier certainty evaporating. "There's a lot I don't know about your past, isn't there?" "Yes," Vivian admitted. "And some of it I'm not proud of. But I'm trying to be better, to do better." She reached across the table, stopping just short of touching his hand. "Please, don't let my past mistakes affect Emma's future." Jack pulled back slightly, running a hand through his graying hair. "I need more time," he said. "This isn't just about the money or the opportunity. It's about who we let into our lives, who we trust with our dreams." He gathered the application papers and handed them back to her. "I'm sorry." Vivian accepted the papers with steady hands, sliding them back into the envelope. "I understand," she said, though her voice carried a tremor she couldn't quite hide. She stood, collecting her things with precise movements. "Take all the time you need, but remember, 2 weeks until the deadline." She walked out of the diner with her head held high, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Through the window, Jack watched as she reached her car and slipped inside. For a moment, she just sat there, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. Then her shoulders began to shake, and she bowed her head, alone with her tears in the privacy of her car. Jack turned away, unable to watch any more. Martha appeared with a fresh cup of coffee, setting it down without a word. The diner's usual chatter gradually returned, but Jack barely noticed, lost in thoughts of trust, forgiveness, and the weight of past mistakes. Jack stood in his modest living room, watching the late afternoon sunlight filter through the curtains Sarah had sewn years ago. The manila envelope from Vivian lay on the coffee table, its contents spread out like fallen leaves, application forms, portfolio guidelines, and a brochure showing the grand brick buildings of Westwood Academy of Arts. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, her sketchbook open beside her, eyes fixed on her father with a mix of hope and anxiety. She hadn't said a word since they'd settled in to have this conversation, but her fingers kept fidgeting with the silver locket around her neck. "Before I say anything," Jack began, his voice steady but gentle, "I want you to understand something, Emma. This isn't about the money or about holding you back. It's about making sure we're doing what's right." Emma nodded, her honey-brown hair falling forward. "I know, Dad." Jack picked up one of Emma's recent sketches, a detailed drawing of their backyard maple tree. The branches reached toward the sky like outstretched arms, each leaf rendered with careful attention. His daughter had talent. He'd never doubted that. The doorbell rang, its chime breaking the heavy moment. Vivian stood on the porch, perfectly put together in a casual navy blazer and jeans, an outfit that probably cost more than Jack's monthly mortgage payment. But there was something different about her today. The corporate armor she usually wore seemed softer somehow. "Come in," Jack said, stepping aside. "We were just looking at the application materials." Vivian's heels clicked softly on the hardwood floor as she entered. She smiled at Emma, then turned to Jack with careful professionalism. "Have you had a chance to think about it?" Jack gestured for everyone to sit. He took his usual armchair while Vivian perched on the edge of the couch near Emma. The room felt smaller with her in it, charged with an energy that made Jack both uncomfortable and oddly aware. "I have," he said finally, "and I've decided to accept your offer." He held up a hand as Emma's face lit up. "But I need to be clear about something, Vivian. This is for Emma. It doesn't change what happened with Sarah, and I'm not ready to just—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. "To forgive me," Vivian finished quietly. "I understand, Jack. I'm not asking for that. This is about Emma's future, nothing else." Emma looked between them, her joy slightly dimmed by the tension, but still radiating excitement. "So I can really apply? To Westwood?" "Yes, sweetheart," Jack said, managing a smile. "But it's going to take a lot of work. This isn't just about sending in some drawings." Vivian opened her portfolio, pulling out a notebook. "That's actually why I brought these guidelines. The portfolio requirements are very specific. They want to see range, technical skill, and creative vision." She turned to Emma. "Would you mind showing me your current sketches?" Emma practically bounced off the floor, gathering her artwork from around the room. Jack watched as she spread her pieces across the coffee table. Landscapes, portraits, still lifes, and abstract experiments in various mediums. Vivian studied each piece carefully, making notes. "You have natural talent, Emma, but we'll need to focus on certain areas. Your perspective work could use some refinement, and they'll want to see more figure drawing." "Could you help me?" Emma asked, her voice eager. "I mean, if you have time." Vivian glanced at Jack, waiting for his permission. He nodded slowly. "As long as we're clear about boundaries," he said. "We'll need to work out a schedule that doesn't interfere with school or family time." "Of course," Vivian agreed. "Maybe we could start now? I brought some materials." She reached into her bag and pulled out a professional sketching set. Emma's eyes widened at the sight of the pristine pencils and charcoal sticks. "These are amazing!" "Why don't we set up at the kitchen table?" Vivian suggested. "The light's better there." Jack watched them move to the kitchen, Emma chattering about her latest art project at school while Vivian listened intently. They settled at the old oak table, the same one where Sarah used to help Emma with her homework, where countless family dinners had been shared. Standing in the doorway, Jack observed as Vivian demonstrated proper shading techniques. Her manicured hands moved confidently across the paper, creating depth and shadow with just a few strokes. Emma leaned in close, absorbing every detail, her face bright with concentration. "See how the pressure changes here?" Vivian explained, her voice soft and encouraging. "That's what gives it dimension." Emma tried to replicate the technique, her tongue poking out slightly, a habit she'd had since she was little. Vivian praised her effort, then gently corrected her grip on the pencil. The scene before him stirred complicated emotions in Jack's chest. There was gratitude, yes, for the opportunity being given to his daughter, for the genuine care Vivian seemed to show. But unease lingered like a shadow, whispering reminders of past wounds and present doubts. The afternoon light streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over the pair as they worked. Their heads bent together over the paper, dark hair and light, creating art and possibility. Jack couldn't help but notice how natural they looked, how easily they'd fallen into this dynamic of mentor and student. "Dad, look!" Emma held up her sketch proudly. "Vivian showed me how to make it look more three-dimensional." Jack moved closer, examining the drawing of a simple ceramic vase. The shading did make it appear to rise from the page, more realistic than Emma's previous attempts. "That's really good, sweetheart." Vivian looked up at him, her expression both pleased and cautious. She seemed to understand the delicate balance they were all trying to maintain, the careful dance between past and future, hurt and hope. Jack rested his hand on the back of Emma's chair, watching as she started another sketch. The scratching of pencils on paper filled the kitchen with a peaceful rhythm, reminding him of quiet evenings when Sarah would sit in this very spot, drawing in her journal while dinner cooked. The memory brought both pain and something else. A small voice, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, this was what Sarah would have wanted for their daughter. A chance to grow, to learn, to chase her dreams with proper guidance. Still, as he watched Vivian demonstrate another technique, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping onto uncertain ground. The path ahead seemed both promising and precarious, like a bridge they'd have to cross carefully, one step at a time. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Willow Creek Community Church, casting colorful patterns across the worn wooden pews. Jack Harper sat in his usual spot, 5 rows from the back, where he and Emma had sat every Sunday since Sarah passed. The familiar scent of old hymnals and wood polish usually brought him comfort, but today something felt different. A subtle ripple of whispers moved through the congregation as Vivian Clark walked in, dressed in a modest navy blue dress that still somehow managed to look expensive. She carried herself with characteristic grace, but Jack noticed a slight tension in her shoulders as she made her way down the aisle. Emma waved enthusiastically from their pew, and Vivian's face brightened with genuine warmth. She slipped in beside them, giving Emma a gentle side hug and nodding respectfully to Jack. The whispers grew more noticeable. "Did you hear about what happened at Morton Manufacturing?" Mrs. Peterson's stage whisper carried from 2 rows back. "My cousin lost his pension when her company took over," another voice added. Jack tried to focus on Pastor Mike's sermon about forgiveness and new beginnings, but he couldn't help noticing how the Hendersons, who usually sat in front of them, had shifted several inches away from their pew. Even little Tommy Henderson, who normally high-fived Emma before Sunday school, kept his eyes down. Vivian sat straight-backed, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but Jack saw her knuckles whiten when someone behind them muttered something about corporate vultures. Emma, absorbed in doodling angels in the margins of her bulletin, seemed oblivious to the tension. After the service, people clustered in their usual groups for coffee and cookies in the fellowship hall. Vivian stood slightly apart, holding her styrofoam cup like a shield. A few church members approached her with cautious friendliness, but others deliberately turned away when she tried to catch their eye. Mrs. Matthews, who had taught Sunday school since before Jack was born, cornered him by the coffee pot. Her cloud of white hair quivered with concern as she touched his arm. "Jack Harper, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper," she began, her voice low and urgent. "And I knew your dear Sarah. God rest her soul. That woman there," she gestured discreetly toward Vivian, who was attempting to make conversation with the church secretary, "she's not what she seems." Jack shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Matthews." "Now, don't you interrupt me, young man. I read about her in the business section. She's known for hostile takeovers, destroying family businesses. My nephew worked for a company she acquired. Hundreds lost their jobs." Mrs. Matthews' pale blue eyes were sharp with worry. "I know she's been spending time with you and Emma, and I just can't stay quiet. You need to be careful, Jack. People like her, they don't change their spots." Across the room, Vivian was making her way toward them, but Pastor Mike intercepted her. Jack watched as she listened intently to whatever the pastor was saying, her expression earnest and open. "I appreciate your concern," Jack said carefully to Mrs. Matthews. "But Emma—" "That's exactly what I'm worried about, Mrs." Matthews pressed. "Emma's such a sweet girl, just like her mother. She trusts so easily. And now I hear this woman's offering to pay for some fancy art school?" She shook her head. "There's always strings attached, Jack. Always." The drive home was quiet. Vivian had left shortly after the service, citing a business call, but her presence seemed to linger in the car like a shadow. Jack glanced at Emma, in the passenger seat, wondering if she'd picked up on any of the morning's undercurrent. "Dad," Emma asked, breaking the silence, "do you think Vivian would help me with my charcoal technique? I'm having trouble with shading." "We'll see, sweetheart," Jack replied, his hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "We'll see." When they pulled into their driveway, Emma immediately headed for her room, eager to work on her portfolio. Jack followed more slowly, his mind churning with Mrs. Matthews' warnings and the morning's whispers. The house welcomed them with its familiar creaks and shadows. Through Emma's open door, Jack could see her already settled at her desk, completely absorbed in her artwork. Sunlight streamed through her window, highlighting the look of pure joy on her face as she bent over her sketchbook. Her colored pencils were scattered across the desk like pickup sticks, and her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration, just like Sarah's used to when she was focused on something. She was humming softly, adding delicate details to what looked like a portrait. Jack recognized the elegant profile taking shape on the paper: Vivian. But in Emma's rendering, there was something vulnerable in the expression, something that made her look more human than the polished CEO who had walked into church that morning. Jack stood in the doorway, watching his daughter work, struck by how oblivious she was to the growing complications around her. To Emma, Vivian was simply someone who believed in her talent, who shared her passion for art, who listened to her dreams without dismissing them as impractical. She didn't see the suspicious glances, didn't hear the whispered accusations, didn't feel the weight of past decisions and their consequences. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Emma's desk, and she reached up absently to touch her mother's locket as she considered her drawing. It was a gesture so familiar it made Jack's heart ache. Sarah had done the same thing when she was thinking deeply about something. Jack quietly stepped away from the doorway, leaving Emma to her artistic refuge. In the kitchen, he mechanically started preparing Sunday dinner, trying to sort through his jumbled thoughts. The warnings from church echoed in his mind, mixing with memories of Vivian's genuine remorse that night in the diner, her patient encouragement of Emma's talent, her quiet admission of past mistakes. Through the window, he could see the old maple tree where Sarah used to love to sit and read. Its leaves were just starting to turn golden at the edges, marking another season of change. He wondered what she would say about all this, about Vivian, about Emma's dreams, about forgiveness and second chances. The sound of Emma's cheerful humming drifted down the hallway, a counterpoint to the tension he felt. She was working on her portfolio pieces, blissfully unaware of the undercurrent of concern rippling through their small community. For now, at least, her world was still filled with the simple joy of creating, unmarred by the complications of adult doubts and fears. Vivian Clark sat straight-backed in her leather chair at the head of the gleaming conference table. Morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her top-floor office, but the atmosphere inside was anything but bright. 5 board members glared at her from their seats, their faces pinched with barely contained frustration. "This is ridiculous, Vivian." Gerald Matthews, the eldest board member, pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "The New York Times is running another exposé next week. We need you there, handling this personally." Vivian's fingers tightened around her pen, but her voice remained steady. "I have a perfectly capable PR team in New York. They know how to handle the press." "Handle the press?" Sandra Porter's carefully plucked eyebrows shot up. "Like they handled the last crisis? Our stock dropped 12 points. Which it recovered from within 2 weeks, Vivian countered. She set her pen down carefully, looking each board member in the eye. "I have commitments here in Willow Creek that I cannot and will not abandon." "Commitments?" Gerald's face reddened. What could possibly be more important than saving this company's reputation? Some small-town charity project? Vivian felt her jaw clench. The image of Emma bent over her sketchbook flashed through her mind. The girl's face lit up with concentration as she worked on her portfolio pieces. Then there was Jack, with his quiet strength and questioning eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed walls. "My personal matters are not up for discussion," she said firmly. "I've given 20 years of my life to this company. I've sacrificed everything: relationships, family, any semblance of a normal life to build it into what it is today." "Exactly." Thomas Chen, the youngest board member, leaned forward. "You built this company. Now you need to protect it." Vivian stood up, smoothing her charcoal gray skirt. "I am protecting it. Just not in the way you think I should." She walked to the window, looking out over the small town she'd come to think of as a sanctuary. Sometimes, protecting something means knowing when to step back and let it breathe. "This isn't about protecting the company," Sandra said, her voice sharp. "This is about you hiding from the fallout. These small-town distractions." "That's enough." Vivian's voice cut through the room like steel. She turned back to face them, her expression hard. "I've made my decision. I will handle things from here, coordinate with the New York office virtually, and travel there when absolutely necessary. But I'm staying in Willow Creek." "The board could force your hand on this," Gerald threatened, his jowls quivering. "You could try," Vivian replied calmly. "But my contract is very clear about my autonomy in these matters. And I don't think you want to risk the additional press coverage a power struggle would bring right now." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. One by one, the board members gathered their papers and tablets, their disapproval evident in every movement. Sandra was the last to leave, pausing at the door. "Whatever you're involved with here," she said, "I hope it's worth risking everything you've built." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Vivian alone in her suddenly too quiet office. She walked back to her desk, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of files, she kept a small photo album. She hadn't opened it in years, but lately it had been calling to her. She pulled it out now, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. Inside, protected by clear plastic, was a photograph from 15 years ago. Sarah Harper stood in the company break room, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing the purple cardigan she always kept at her desk because the office was too cold. She was laughing at something off camera, her eyes crinkled at the corners, a coffee mug clutched in both hands. Vivian remembered taking this picture. It was during the company picnic, just months before the layoffs. Sarah had been telling a story about young Emma's first attempt at making breakfast in bed, how she'd found Cheerios scattered all over the hallway leading to their bedroom. The memory made Vivian's throat tight. She traced Sarah's face with her fingertip, remembering how the woman had always taken time to ask about Vivian's day, even though Vivian was several levels above her in the company hierarchy. Sarah had seen through her power suits and carefully maintained facade, treating her like a real person instead of just another corporate climber. "I'm trying, Sarah," Vivian whispered to the photograph. Her voice sounded small in the large office. "I'm trying to make things right." She thought about Emma's talent, so raw and promising, about Jack's cautious acceptance of her help, despite knowing the role she'd played in their family's hardships. About the way this small town, despite its whispers and judgments, had somehow begun to feel more like home than any penthouse apartment ever had. The intercom buzzed, startling her. "Miss Clark? Your 3 o'clock is here." Vivian quickly returned the photo to its drawer, composing herself. "Send them in." But before closing the drawer, she glanced once more at Sarah's smiling face. The path to redemption wasn't supposed to be easy, she reminded herself. If it was, it wouldn't mean anything at all. The community center buzzed with activity as volunteers hung artwork along the walls. Vivian moved between them, directing the placement of each piece with careful consideration. Her usual power suit was replaced by a simple blue dress, and she carried a clipboard instead of her designer handbag. "A little higher on the left, please," she called out to a volunteer struggling with a large canvas. "We want everyone to see these beautiful pieces at eye level." The room slowly transformed into a makeshift gallery. Paintings, sketches, and photographs from local artists filled every available space. In the corner, Emma arranged her own display with trembling hands. 3 charcoal drawings she'd worked on for weeks. "Those look amazing, sweetheart," Vivian said, stopping to admire Emma's work. The drawings showed everyday scenes around Willow Creek, the old gazebo in the park, children playing by the fountain, and an elderly couple sharing ice cream outside the diner. Emma's cheeks flushed. "You really think so?" "I know so. You have a gift for capturing moments that matter." The first guests began arriving at 6 o'clock. Some wore their Sunday best, while others came straight from work in worn jeans and practical shoes. Vivian greeted each person with the same warm smile, though not all returned it. Martha Wilson, who owned the flower shop, walked right past Vivian without acknowledgement. She wasn't the only one. A group of men in business suits huddled near the entrance, speaking in low voices and casting suspicious glances. But others came forward with genuine interest. Mrs. Henderson, Emma's art teacher, brought her entire family. The local librarian arrived with a homemade cake for the refreshment table. Even the gruff owner of the hardware store where Jack worked showed up, his wife on his arm. "Nice turnout," he said gruffly to Jack, who stood near Emma's display. "Despite, you know." Jack shifted uncomfortably. Despite what, Tom? Well, Tom lowered his voice. You know what they say about her. Corporate shark. Ruins businesses for profit. Before Jack could respond, he spotted Vivian across the room, kneeling beside a wheelchair. In it sat little Tommy Baker, a 10-year-old with cerebral palsy. She was looking at his painting with genuine wonder, asking him questions about his inspiration. Tommy's face lit up as he explained his art, his usual speech difficulties forgotten in his excitement. The sight made something twist in Jack's chest. This wasn't the cold-hearted executive from the rumors. This was someone else entirely. Throughout the evening, more people filtered in. Some came to support the cause, others out of curiosity. A few left quickly, making their disapproval known with loud whispers. But most stayed, drawn in by the artwork and the sense of community that began to build. Emma flitted between guests, like a butterfly, explaining her drawings to anyone who would listen. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and even some of the initial skeptics found themselves smiling at her passionate descriptions. Your daughter has real talent, Vivian said softly, appearing at Jack's side. She'd been on her feet for hours, but her energy hadn't dimmed. Thank you for coming tonight. I know it wasn't an easy decision. Jack watched Emma chatting with a group of art enthusiasts. She needed this, he admitted. A chance to share her gift. We all need that sometimes. Vivian's voice carried a hint of weariness. A chance to show who we really are, not who people think we are. The evening wound down with a small ceremony. Vivian announced the total funds raised, enough to start a weekly art program for local youth, with supplies and instruction provided free of charge. She didn't mention that she'd quietly matched every donation, doubling the final amount. As people began to leave, Jack noticed Vivian helping Tommy Baker's mother load his artwork into their van. She insisted on carrying the heaviest pieces herself, her expensive dress getting dusty in the process. When Tommy's mother tried to thank her, Vivian simply hugged her and whispered something that made both women smile through tears. Back inside, Emma was carefully packing up her drawings. Dad, can you believe 3 people wanted to buy my work? Mrs. Henderson says I could probably sell prints. That's wonderful, honey. Jack squeezed her shoulder, his heart full of pride. Vivian approached them, looking tired but happy. Emma, would you mind helping Mrs. Baker wrap up the remaining refreshments? She's taking them to the senior center tomorrow. Once Emma bounced away, Vivian turned to Jack. I know there are people in town who think I shouldn't be here, who believe the worst about me. She straightened a crooked frame on the wall. Some of what they say is true. I've made mistakes, terrible ones. But this, she gestured around the room. This is who I want to be now. Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the polished exterior to something genuine and vulnerable. He saw someone trying to build something meaningful out of regret. Someone who could have thrown money at her guilt, but chose instead to invest time, effort, and heart. Thank you, he said simply, for doing this for the community. For Emma. A small smile touched Vivian's lips, tired but real. She opened her mouth to respond, but Emma came bounding back, full of excitement about helping distribute the leftover cake. The community center slowly emptied, leaving behind the echo of conversations and the lingering sense that something had shifted in Willow Creek that evening. Art had brought people together, bridging some of the gaps between skepticism and acceptance, between past and present. The fundraiser's success hung in the evening air like the last notes of a sweet melody. Jack helped Vivian carry the remaining donation boxes to his truck, their footsteps echoing in the empty community center parking lot. The spring night was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming dogwoods. I still can't believe we raised enough for a whole year of art supplies, Vivian said, smoothing her blue dress as she climbed into the passenger seat. Her usual corporate polish had softened during the long day, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. Jack started the engine, the familiar rattle of his old truck, a sharp contrast to Vivian's usual luxury car. Emma couldn't stop smiling when she saw how many people liked her drawings. He pulled onto Main Street, where the streetlights cast warm pools of light on the empty sidewalks. She has real talent, Jack. Vivian's voice grew quiet. Sarah would be so proud of her. The mention of Sarah's name hung between them. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yeah, she would. He cleared his throat. Sarah always said Emma had an old soul. Used to find her drawing instead of playing with toys, even when she was tiny. Vivian turned toward him, her face half lit by passing streetlights. My marriage ended because I was always chasing the next big deal. She traced a pattern on the window with her finger. David, my ex, he said he felt like he was married to a corporation instead of a person. Must have been hard, Jack said softly, taking the turn toward the Lakeshore Inn. I thought I was building something important. Vivian's laugh held no humor. Turns out I was just running away from feeling anything real. She paused, looking out at the dark lake. The day I signed the divorce papers, I went straight to a board meeting. Didn't even cry until 3 days later. Jack pulled into the hotel's circular drive, cutting the engine. The fountain's peaceful burble filled the silence. After Sarah. He stopped, surprised by the tightness in his throat. After we lost her, I threw myself into work. 2 jobs, overtime, anything to stay busy. Emma was the one who made me slow down. How? Vivian turned to face him fully now. She left me a note in my lunchbox, said she missed having breakfast with me. Jack smiled at the memory. Written in crayon, spelling all wrong, but it hit me hard. I was so busy trying not to feel the loss that I was losing what I had left. Vivian's hand found his arm, her touch gentle. You're a good father, Jack. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The carefully constructed corporate facade was gone, leaving just a woman who understood loss, who had made mistakes, and carried regrets. The moonlight silvered her hair, caught the uncertainty in her eyes. They leaned toward each other, drawn by something neither had expected. Jack could smell her subtle perfume, feel the warmth of her breath. Their lips were inches apart when a car door slammed somewhere in the parking lot, startling them both. They pulled back quickly, the moment broken. Jack cleared his throat again, looking straight ahead. Vivian's hands fluttered to her necklace, fidgeting with the delicate chain. I should go in, she said softly, reaching for the door handle. Thank you for the ride, Jack, and for everything today. Of course. His voice was rough. Good night, Vivian. She stepped out of the truck, her heels clicking on the pavement. At the hotel entrance, she turned back to watch his taillights disappear down the dark street. Her fingers drifted to her lips, touching them gently as if trying to capture the whisper of what almost was. The fountain played its steady song behind her, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called into the night. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Emma's sketches as she spread them carefully on the dining room table. Her portfolio was a testament to months of hard work, landscapes of Willow Creek, portraits of townspeople, and abstract pieces that captured raw emotion. Jack watched from the doorway, coffee mug in hand, as Vivian helped Emma arrange the artwork. The light and shadow work in this one is exceptional, Vivian said, holding up a charcoal drawing of an elderly man feeding pigeons in the town square. Her designer suit looked out of place in their modest kitchen, but her smile was genuine as she studied Emma's work. Emma tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her cheeks pink with pride. I worked on the shading for days. Do you really think it's good enough? More than good enough, Vivian assured her, carefully sliding the drawing into a professional portfolio case she'd brought. Dean Martinez has been teaching art for 30 years. She'll see what I see, a young artist with both technical skill and emotional depth. Jack set his mug down and joined them at the table. What time is the meeting? 10 o'clock, Vivian replied, checking her watch. We should leave in 20 minutes to be safe. Traffic can be unpredictable on the highway. Emma gathered her remaining sketches with trembling hands. Her excitement was palpable, but Jack could see the nervous energy in her movements. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. You've got this, sweetheart, he said softly. Just be yourself. The drive to Westwood Academy took just over an hour. Emma sat in the back seat of Vivian's car, clutching her portfolio and watching the landscape change from rural to suburban. Jack noticed how she grew quieter as they approached the sprawling campus. The academy grounds were impressive brick buildings with white columns, perfectly manicured lawns, and students sketching under ancient oak trees. Emma's eyes widened as they walked past a sculpture garden where sunlight danced off abstract metal forms. "This is amazing," she whispered, taking everything in. Dean Martinez's office reflected her personality, warm and artistic, with student works adorning the walls and a large window overlooking the campus. The dean herself, a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, greeted them with genuine interest. "Miss Harper," she said, shaking Emma's hand, "Ms. Clark has told me wonderful things about your work. Shall we take a look?" For the next hour, Emma presented her portfolio with growing confidence. The dean asked thoughtful questions about her techniques and inspiration, nodding approvingly at each piece. Jack watched his daughter blossom under the attention, her initial nervousness giving way to passionate explanations of her creative process. "This piece particularly moves me," Dean Martinez said, examining Emma's watercolor of their local church at sunset. "There's a wonderful sense of community and peace in it. Tell me about your choice of colors." As Emma described how she'd mixed the paints to capture the exact shade of the evening sky, Jack caught Vivian watching his daughter with unmistakable pride. It was a look he recognized, the same one Sarah used to wear when Emma mastered something new. The dean set down the last piece and smiled warmly. "Well, Miss Harper, I'm very impressed. Your technical skills are advanced for your age, but more importantly, you have a unique perspective. That's something we can't teach, it comes from the heart." Emma sat straighter in her chair. "Does that mean?" "It means I would be very interested in having you join our summer program," Dean Martinez said. "It's an intensive 8-week course that often leads to full admission. Consider it a stepping stone." The joy that spread across Emma's face made Jack's heart swell. He'd seen that expression before on Sarah's face when she'd gotten her first art commission. The resemblance was striking. After the meeting, they toured the campus. Emma practically floated from building to building, asking questions about classes and techniques. In the main gallery, they watched students working on large canvases, the air thick with the smell of oil paints and possibility. On the drive home, Emma chattered excitedly from the back seat about everything she'd seen. Jack listened, his heart both full and heavy. His daughter's dreams were within reach, thanks to the woman beside him, the same woman he'd once blamed for so much pain. When they dropped Emma at home, she hugged Vivian tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, then rushed inside to call her best friend with the news. Jack lingered by Vivian's car, struggling to find the right words. The late afternoon sun caught the silver in her dark hair, and for a moment he was struck by how different she seemed from. The morning started like any other in Willow Creek. Jack was fixing breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, while Emma gathered her art supplies for another session with Vivian. The local news played quietly on their small kitchen TV, its familiar drone a comforting backdrop to their morning routine. Then, the tone of the newscast changed. "Breaking news from the business world," the anchor announced, her voice sharp with urgency. "Corporate giant Vivian Clark, CEO of Clark Industries, faces serious allegations." Jack's hand froze mid-flip with the spatula. On screen, Vivian's professional headshot appeared next to damning headlines. Emma looked up from her sketchbook. "Dad, isn't that?" "Shh," Jack said, turning up the volume. The story unfolded in brutal detail. A former board member had come forward with documents, years of emails, memos, and financial records. They painted a picture of systematic corporate raiding, intentional bankruptcy of smaller companies, and calculated destruction of working-class jobs to boost profit margins. Jack's stomach churned as he recognized the pattern. Sarah's company had been just one of many. His phone buzzed. A text from Tom at the hardware store. "You seen the news? Your new friend's quite the piece of work." More messages followed. The whole town was waking up to the story. Emma's phone chimed, to her art school friends sharing links to online articles. "Dad, they're saying awful things about Ms. Clark." "Go finish getting ready for school," Jack said quietly. "We'll talk later." Once Emma was upstairs, Jack sat heavily at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. The story was everywhere. Major news networks had picked it up. Social media was exploding with outrage. He clicked through article after article, each one worse than the last. The whistleblower had provided recorded conversations of Vivian in boardrooms, her voice cold and calculating as she discussed necessary workforce reductions and acceptable collateral damage. One clip hit particularly hard. "Small towns recover," Vivian's voice said dismissively. "They always do. Our shareholders come first." Jack's coffee grew cold as he read. The woman in these stories, the corporate assassin, as one headline dubbed her, seemed nothing like the Vivian who'd sat in his kitchen helping Emma with her sketches, who'd shared cherry pie with him at the diner, who'd seemed so genuine in her desire to make amends. His phone rang. Vivian's name flashed on the screen. He let it go to voicemail. It rang again. And again. Outside, he heard car doors slamming. Through the window, he saw news vans pulling up to the Lakeshore Inn where Vivian was staying. Reporters with cameras and microphones huddled in the morning chill, waiting. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Jack, please, let me explain. It's not what it seems." Another text followed. "I never lied to you about wanting to make things right." And another. "Please don't let this destroy what we've built." Jack set his phone face down on the table. The betrayal felt fresh again, like a reopened wound. All those years ago, when Sarah lost her job, they'd been told it was just business, nothing personal. Now he knew better. It had been calculated, intentional, part of a pattern. The morning news droned on, dissecting Vivian's career piece by piece. Photos flashed across the screen. Vivian at charity galas. Vivian accepting business awards. Vivian shaking hands with politicians. The perfect corporate success story, they said, built on broken lives. Emma came back downstairs, backpack in hand. "Everyone's talking about it online?" she said softly. "They're saying the art program might get canceled. That the scholarship." "We'll figure something out," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Go on to school. Focus on your classes." After Emma left, Jack sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the headlines on his laptop. Clark Industries, CEO exposed, a decade of deception. Corporate raiders' ruthless rise to power. Whistleblower reveals systematic destruction of small businesses. His phone kept buzzing. Vivian's messages grew more desperate. "Jack, I know you're reading these. The story isn't complete. There's more you need to know. Everything I told you about Sarah was true, about wanting to make amends. Please don't shut me out." He thought about the art show she'd organized, the way she'd mentored Emma, the vulnerable moments they'd shared. Had it all been another calculated move? Another corporate strategy? The morning sun climbed higher, streaming through the kitchen window. Jack picked up his phone, thumb hovering over Vivian's messages. Part of him wanted to believe her. Wanted to trust that the woman who'd sat in his truck that rainy night, haunted by regret, was the real Vivian Clark. But the evidence was overwhelming. The cold, hard facts spelled out in black and white across every major news outlet. The recorded conversations. The paper trail. His phone buzzed one final time. "Vivian again. I understand if you hate me, but please don't punish Emma for my mistakes." Jack set the phone down and rubbed his temples. The familiar sting of betrayal settled in his chest, heavy and bitter. He'd let himself trust again, let Emma get attached, let his guard down only to discover that some corporate calculations never changed. On the TV, footage played of Vivian leaving a shareholders' meeting years ago. She looked directly at the camera, confident and untouchable, as she delivered a line that now felt like a knife to the gut. "Business isn't about being liked, it's about getting results." The phone call came just after lunch. Jack was washing dishes when Emma's excited squeal from the living room turned into sudden silence. He dried his hands quickly and walked over, finding her frozen with the cordless phone pressed to her ear, her face draining of color. "Thank you for letting me know," Emma whispered into the receiver, her voice trembling. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the coffee table. "Emma?" Jack reached for her shoulder, but she jerked away. "They took it back," she said, her words barely audible. "The scholarship, they said," her breath hitched. "They said they have concerns about being associated with. She couldn't finish. Tears welled up in her eyes as she bolted from the room. Her footsteps thundered up the stairs, followed by the sharp slam of her bedroom door. Jack stood there, stunned, as Emma's sobs filtered down through the ceiling. His hands clenched into fists. Then relaxed a pattern he'd developed over years of managing anger through prayer. But this time, the prayers wouldn't come. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavy with the weight of his daughter's broken dreams. Standing outside her door, he could hear her muffled crying. "Emma, honey?" He knocked gently. "Can we talk about this?" "Go away!" The words were followed by what sounded like a pillow hitting the door. "Emma, please." "I said, go away," her voice cracked. "I don't want to talk to anyone." Jack rested his forehead against the door frame, feeling helpless. The last time he'd heard her cry like this was at Sarah's funeral. The memory stirred something in him, a protective fury he thought he'd buried years ago. He descended the stairs, grabbed his truck keys, and drove the familiar route to the Lakeshore Inn. Dark clouds gathered overhead, matching his mood. The first drops of rain began to fall as he pulled into the parking lot. Vivian opened her door on the third knock. She looked different from the polished CEO he'd grown used to seeing. Her face was bare of makeup, her designer clothes replaced by a simple sweater and slacks. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept. "Jack," she said softly, "I was going to call." "Were you?" His voice came out harder than he'd intended. "Before or after my daughter cried herself sick over losing her scholarship?" Vivian flinched. "I just heard about the Academy's decision. I'm already working on." "On what? Another plan? Another way to fix things?" Jack stepped closer, his voice low but intense. "Like you fixed things at your company? Like you fixed things when you laid Sarah off?" "That's not fair," Vivian's eyes flashed. "I told you about my past because I wanted to be honest. I've been trying to make things right. By using my daughter as your redemption project?" The words hung in the air between them. Vivian took a step back as if he'd struck her. "Is that what you think this is?" She grabbed her coat from a nearby chair. "Come with me." She brushed past him, heading for the door. After a moment's hesitation, Jack followed her out onto the covered porch. The rain was falling steadily now, creating a curtain of water beyond the overhang. "I grew up with nothing," Vivian said, watching the rain. "My mother cleaned houses. My father left when I was 4. I worked my way through college on scholarships and determination, telling myself I'd never be powerless again." She turned to face him. "But power corrupted me. I made decisions that hurt people, good people like Sarah. When I saw Emma's talent, I thought maybe I could finally—" "Finally what?" Jack demanded. "Clear your conscience?" "Help someone the way I wish someone had helped me." Vivian's composure cracked. "I wasn't trying to hide my past, Jack. I was trying to build a future for Emma, yes, but also—" She paused, vulnerability crossing her face. "For us." Jack felt his anger waver. "There is no us, Vivian. There can't be. Not after this. Because of mistakes I made years ago? Mistakes I've admitted to and tried to atone for?" She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "What happened to forgiveness, Jack? To second chances?" "Don't." Jack held up his hand. "Don't use my faith against me. Not when my daughter is upstairs crying because of your past catching up with us." Vivian's shoulders slumped. "I never meant for Emma to get hurt. You have to believe that." "I don't have to believe anything anymore." Jack turned away, unable to look at the pain in her eyes. "I think it's best if you leave Willow Creek. Go back to your corporate life in New York. It's where you belong." The rain grew heavier, drumming against the porch roof. Vivian stood silent for a long moment, then walked past Jack toward the steps. She paused at the top, not turning around. "You're wrong about where I belong, but you're right about one thing: I did want redemption. I just didn't expect to find something worth more than that along the way." With those words, she stepped into the downpour. Jack watched her walk away, her figure growing blurry through the sheets of rain. She didn't look back once, her shoulders straight despite the water soaking through her clothes. Only when she disappeared from view did Jack realize he was gripping the porch railing so hard his knuckles had turned white. He forced himself to let go, feeling the ache in his finger sand, the deeper ache in his heart. The rain continued to fall as he stood there, wondering if he'd just made the right decision or the biggest mistake of his life. Either way, he had a crying daughter to comfort, and no idea how to tell her that sometimes dreams get broken by the very people trying to protect them. The autumn wind rustled through the nearly bare trees, scattering red and gold leaves across Jack's driveway. He'd been working double shifts at both jobs all week, coming home long after Emma had gone to bed. It was easier than facing her disappointment, her quiet suffering that reminded him too much of Sarah. Monday morning dawned gray and chilly. Jack stood at the kitchen counter, mechanically stirring his coffee, watching Emma pick at her cereal. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally bouncy curls hung limp around her face. She hadn't touched her sketchbook in days. "You'll be late for school," he said softly. Emma shrugged, pushing her bowl away. "Does it matter?" The words stung, but Jack couldn't blame her. He'd seen her college acceptance letter tucked away in her drawer, now just a painful reminder of what could have been. At work, Jack threw himself into fixing cars, letting the familiar rhythm of wrenches and metal drown out his thoughts. But during his lunch break, he couldn't help overhearing Emma's voice drifting through the open garage door. She was sitting on the curb with her best friend Jenny, their heads close together. "I was so stupid," Emma was saying, her voice thick with tears. "I actually believed things could be different, that someone like her could change." "Maybe she really was trying," Jenny offered. Emma's laugh was bitter, so unlike her usual bright giggle that Jack's heart clenched. "Yeah, right. Mom always said to believe the best in people, but look where that got us. I don't believe in second chances anymore." Jack's wrench slipped, clanging against the concrete floor. He retrieved it with trembling hands, remembering Sarah's unwavering faith in people's capacity for good. She'd believed in redemption until the very end. That evening, after another silent dinner, Jack found Emma's latest sketch crumpled in the trash. He smoothed it out carefully. It was a portrait of Vivian, captured in soft lines and gentle shadows. The artist had seen past the CEO's polished exterior to something vulnerable underneath, something real. Wednesday brought rain, matching their mood. Jack mechanically went through his routine. Hardware store in the morning, garage in the afternoon. He barely noticed the concerned looks from his coworkers or the way customers treated him extra gently, as if he might break. Thursday, Emma didn't come down for breakfast. He found a note saying she'd gone to school early to work on a project. The kitchen felt emptier than usual. By Friday, the silence in their house had become unbearable. Jack found himself talking to Sarah in his head more and more, wondering what she would say about all this. She'd always been better at handling emotional crises. Saturday morning he drove to the cemetery, something he hadn't done in months. The groundskeeper had cleared away the fallen leaves around Sarah's headstone, leaving it neat and clean. Jack sat down on the damp grass, not caring about his jeans. "I need your help, Sarah," he whispered, tracing her name with his finger. "Emma's hurting, and I don't know how to fix it. She's losing that light inside her, the one that reminded me so much of you." A sparrow landed nearby, tilting its head as if listening. "You always said forgiveness wasn't just about the other person," Jack continued. "That it was about freeing yourself too, but how do I teach that to Emma when I'm still struggling with it myself?" The wind stirred Sarah's favorite rosebush, planted beside her grave. A few stubborn blooms still clung to its branches, defying the autumn chill. "Vivian made mistakes, big ones. But you'd have seen past that, wouldn't you? You'd have recognized someone trying to change, trying to make things right." He thought about Emma's crumpled drawing, about the genuine joy in Vivian's eyes when she helped Emma with her portfolio, about the way she'd looked that night in his truck, vulnerable and lost, whispering about mistakes she couldn't undo. "Emma says she doesn't believe in second chances anymore," Jack said quietly. "And that's on me, isn't it? Because I've been teaching her to hold on to hurt instead of showing her how to let go." The morning sun broke through the clouds, warming his face. For a moment, he could almost hear Sarah's gentle laugh, could almost feel her hand on his shoulder, urging him to do what he knew was right. He sat there until his legs went numb, surrounded by the peaceful quiet of the cemetery, thinking about forgiveness and second chances and what Sarah would have done. The answer was there, in his heart, where it had been all along. He just hadn't been ready to see it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Jack's truck pulled up to the Lakeshore Inn. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight, knuckles white. Through the windshield, he could see moving boxes stacked in the lobby. "Can I help you?" The young desk clerk looked up from her phone. "I'm looking for Vivian Clark. Room 312. She pointed toward the elevator. "But she's busy packing." Jack's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. He paused outside room 312, hearing rustling and the sound of tape being pulled from a roll. After a deep breath, he knocked. "Just leave it outside, please," Vivian called. "It's Jack." Silence fell. Then came the soft click of heels on carpet, and the door opened. Vivian stood there, looking different than he'd ever seen her. Gone were the crisp business suits and perfect makeup. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dark circles under her eyes matched Emma's. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said quietly. Jack glanced past her into the room. Designer clothes lay folded in open suitcases. Boxes lined the walls. "You're leaving?" "The board made it clear I'm no longer welcome." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "New York office wants me gone by the weekend. Can we talk?" Vivian hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. Jack picked his way through the maze of boxes to the window. Below, autumn leaves skittered across the parking lot. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "Jack, you don't have to." "Please." He turned to face her. "I need to say this." Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. "When Sarah died, I was angry at everyone. God, the doctors, myself." Jack's voice grew rough. "Then you showed up, connected to her past, and it was easy to focus all that old anger on you. You had every right." "No," Jack shook his head. "I didn't. Not after seeing how you tried to make things right. The art show, the youth program, everything you did for Emma." Vivian's eyes glistened. "I wanted to help, to show I'd changed." "I know that now." Jack picked up a framed photo from her nightstand, Sarah and Vivian at some company party years ago, both laughing. Sarah always believed people could change. "She'd be disappointed in how I acted." "She was the kindest person I ever knew." Vivian touched the photo gently. "When I made those corporate decisions, I didn't see faces, just numbers. Sarah taught me to look deeper, but I learned too late." "It's never too late." Jack set down the photo. "Emma hasn't touched her sketchbook since everything happened. She told her friend she doesn't believe in second chances anymore." Vivian winced. "I never meant to hurt her." "You didn't." "I did, by letting my past anger poison her future." Jack gestured at the boxes. "Before you leave, would you have dinner with us? Tonight?" Vivian stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "Jack, I don't know if that's a good idea. The whole town's talking. Your reputation." "Let them talk." Jack stepped closer. "Emma needs to see that forgiveness isn't just something we preach about on Sundays. And honestly," he gave a small smile, "I miss our conversations." Vivian walked to the window, staring out at the lengthening shadows. The silence stretched until Jack thought she might refuse. Finally, she turned back. "One last dinner," she said softly. Jack felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. Maybe it wasn't too late for any of them to learn about second chances. 7 o'clock? He asked. Vivian nodded, wiping quickly at her eyes. 7 o'clock. As Jack headed for the door, he paused. "Bring your appetite. Emma's been practicing that chocolate cake recipe you taught her." For the first time in days, Vivian's smile reached her eyes. "I wouldn't miss it." The aroma of roasted chicken and herbs filled the Harper kitchen. Emma set the table while Jack carved the bird, stealing glances at Vivian, who sat somewhat stiffly in her chair, her usual corporate polish softened by obvious fatigue. Dark circles lurked beneath her carefully applied makeup, and her designer blouse looked slightly rumpled. "This smells wonderful," Vivian said, managing a small smile as Jack placed a plate in front of her. "Thank you for having me." Emma slid into her seat, her art sketchbook tucked beneath her chair, a habit she'd developed over the years. The scrape of forks against plates filled the awkward silence until Jack cleared his throat. "Emma helped with the marinade," he offered. "She's getting pretty good in the kitchen." Vivian nodded, pushing a piece of chicken around her plate. "I was never much good at cooking, too busy climbing the corporate ladder to learn basic life skills, I suppose." "Is that why you became a CEO?" Emma asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "Because you were so focused on success?" Vivian set down her fork, her shoulders dropping slightly. "Partly, but mostly because I was terrified of being poor again." She took a sip of water, her hand trembling slightly. "My father lost his job when I was about your age. We lost our house, had to move into a tiny apartment. I started working at 15, determined never to feel that helpless again." Jack watched the exchange quietly, noting how Emma leaned forward, completely engaged. "But somewhere along the way," Vivian continued, "I forgot the difference between being secure and being powerful. I made choices." She paused, swallowing hard. "Terrible choices. I told myself they were necessary for the greater good of the company. That sacrificing a few jobs would save hundreds more." "Like my mom's job," Emma said softly. Vivian's eyes grew wet. "Your mother, Sarah, she was different from anyone else at the company. She actually cared about people, not just profits. When I signed off on those layoffs..." She shook her head. "I knew it was wrong. I knew she had a family. But I was too much of a coward to stand up to the board." Jack's hand tightened around his water glass, but he remained silent, letting them talk. "The thing is, Emma," Vivian continued, "success means nothing if you lose your humanity along the way. I have a penthouse in New York, a vacation home in the Hamptons, more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and not a single real friend until..." She glanced at Jack, then quickly away. Emma pushed her peas around with her fork. "But you tried to make it right, with the scholarship and everything." "I did, and I'm so sorry it fell apart. You deserve better than to have your dreams tangled up in my mistakes." Vivian dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "The worst part is, I truly believe in your talent, Emma. You have this extraordinary gift for capturing emotion in your art. The way you see the world, it reminds me of your mother's compassion." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. Emma's next question came out barely above a whisper. "Do you still believe in me?" Vivian reached across the table, gently touching Emma's hand. "Always. That's one thing that will never change, no matter what happens with the academy or anything else." Emma's eyes welled up, but she managed a wobbly smile. "I've been thinking about maybe trying again. You know, applying to the academy on my own." "Emma," Jack started, concern etching his features. "I know it's a long shot without the sponsorship," Emma continued quickly. "But maybe if my portfolio is strong enough." She pulled her sketchbook from under her chair and opened it to her latest drawings. Studies of hands expressing different emotions: joy, grief, hope, forgiveness. Vivian leaned forward to look, her breath catching. "These are remarkable." "I started them after everything happened," Emma admitted. "Drawing helped me sort out how I felt." Jack stood up and began clearing plates, his movements careful and measured. Anyone who knew him well could see he was deeply moved but trying to maintain his composure. Emma closed her sketchbook, holding it close to her chest. Her voice grew stronger, more determined. "I think Mom would want me to try again. She always said talent is only part of the equation, the rest is persistence." "She was right about that," Vivian said softly. "And about so many other things." Emma nodded, then excused herself from the table. Through the kitchen window, they could see her settling onto the porch swing, sketchbook open on her lap, already lost in her art as the evening light faded. The community center buzzed with angry voices as Jack Harper slipped into the back row. Metal folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor while Mayor Thompson tried to maintain order at the podium. Nearly every seat was filled, a crowd Jack hadn't seen since the town's centennial celebration 2 years ago. "Please, everyone, let's keep this civil," Mayor Thompson said, tapping his microphone. "We're here to discuss recent events concerning Vivian Clark and her presence in our community." Jack's stomach tightened as he watched his neighbors, people he'd known for years, line up at the microphone to speak. Susan from the grocery store wrung her hands as she approached the stand. "I just don't think we can trust someone like her," Susan said, her voice shaking. "What happened with that company of hers? It could happen here too. What if she's just using us for some kind of publicity stunt?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jack's hands balled into fists on his knees. Tom Baker, who owned the hardware store where Jack worked part-time, stood up next. "My cousin lost his job because of her company's takeover tactics. These big city types, they don't care about small towns like ours." More nods, more whispers. Jack watched as person after person stepped forward, each story darker than the last. Some were true, some were clearly exaggerated, and others were nothing more than rumors. But they all painted Vivian as a villain who needed to be driven out. Mrs. Chen from the diner spoke next, her voice soft but firm. "She comes to my diner every morning now, orders the same thing, black coffee and wheat toast. Always leaves a generous tip, always asks about my grandson's college applications." She paused. "That's not the actions of someone trying to hurt our town." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but others shook their heads dismissively. Jack's heart pounded as he stood up. His chair squeaked against the floor, drawing all eyes to him. He walked slowly to the microphone, aware of every step, every breath. These were his neighbors, his friends. But they needed to hear the truth. "I know Vivian Clark better than anyone here," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Yes, she made mistakes in her past, big ones. She admitted them to me before anyone else knew. She came to me, confessed her role in my wife Sarah's layoff years ago." A collective gasp filled the room. Jack continued, "But let me tell you what else she did. She saw my daughter Emma's artwork in the library and recognized real talent. She spent countless hours mentoring Emma, teaching her techniques, sharing her own struggles of growing up with nothing." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who'd known him longest. When the youth center needed new art supplies, Vivian didn't just write a check. She showed up with the supplies herself and stayed to teach a workshop. She didn't bring cameras or press. Most of you didn't even know it was her who did it. Jack's voice grew stronger as he spoke about the real Viviantha. One who brought soup when Emma had the flu. The one who sat in the back pew at church even when people moved away from her. The one who kept trying to make things right even when it would have been easier to leave. "You all knew Sarah," he said, his voice softening. "You know she believed in forgiveness, in second chances. She believed people could change if you gave them the chance. Well, I've seen Vivian change. I've watched her try to make amends not just with words, but with actions." The room had grown completely silent. Jack could hear the old heating system clicking in the background. "Maybe." The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm patterns across the breakfast table where Emma sat pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the disappointment of the past month still weighing heavily on her. Jack watched his daughter from behind his coffee mug, his heart aching. The sparkle that usually lit up her green eyes had dimmed since the scholarship rejection. Even her sketchbook, normally never far from reach, lay untouched on the counter. The sound of tires on gravel made them both look up. Through the window, they could see the mail truck pulling away from their box. "I'll get it," Jack said, setting down his mug. The morning air was crisp as he walked down the driveway, fallen leaves crunching under his work boots. He shuffled through the usual stack, bills, advertisements, a magazine Emma subscribed to. At the bottom was a thick cream-colored envelope addressed to Miss Emma Harper in elegant script. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the return address, Westwood Academy of Arts. Jack held the envelope for a moment, saying a quick prayer before heading back inside. Emma glanced up as he entered, her expression changing when she saw what he held. "Is that?" she whispered, pushing her plate aside. "Only one way to find out," Jack said gently, placing the envelope in front of her. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. She ran her finger under the seal, carefully pulling out several folded papers. Jack moved to stand behind her chair, resting his hands on her shoulders for support. Her eyes scanned the first page, growing wider with each line. "Dad," she breathed. "Dad, I got in, with a full scholarship." Jack squeezed her shoulders, blinking back tears as Emma jumped up to hug him. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," he murmured into her hair. Emma pulled back to read more details, her face glowing. "It says the scholarship is from something called the Sarah Harper Memorial Arts Foundation." She looked up at Jack. "Dad, Sarah Harper? Like Mom?" Jack took the letter, scanning it himself. There at the bottom was a list of foundation board members. His breath caught when he saw the familiar names, all local artists and business owners who had supported the youth art program Vivian had started. And there at the top, Vivian Clark, founder and chairperson. "She did this," Emma said softly. "She started a whole foundation, named it after Mom." Jack nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He remembered Vivian's words from months ago. "Sometimes God puts us in each other's path to make things right." "Can we go see her?" Emma asked, clutching the acceptance letter to her chest. "Please?" 20 minutes later, they pulled up to Vivian's rented cottage near the lake. Her car was in the driveway, but when they knocked, no one answered. "Try the garden," Emma suggested. "She likes to work out there in the mornings." They found Vivian kneeling in her small vegetable patch, wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt, a far cry from her former corporate attire. She looked up at their approach, surprise flickering across her face. "Emma? Jack?" She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Is everything all right?" Emma couldn't contain herself any longer. She rushed forward, throwing her arms around Vivian. "Thank you," she whispered fiercely. "Thank you so much." Vivian stiffened for a moment in surprise, then slowly wrapped her arms around Emma. Her eyes met Jack's over Emma's head, questioning. "The foundation scholarship," Jack explained softly. "We got the letter this morning." Understanding dawned on Vivian's face, followed by a gentle smile. "The board reviewed your portfolio themselves," she told Emma. "They were incredibly impressed. You earned this completely on your own merit." Emma pulled back, wiping happy tears from her cheeks. "But you made it possible. You started the foundation, got all those people involved." "I just provided the structure," Vivian said. "The community did the rest. They believe in supporting young artists like you." She paused, her voice growing softer. "And your mother would have wanted this. She always said art had the power to heal hearts and bring people together." "She was right," Jack said quietly, thinking of how art, and Vivian's belief in it, had helped bring light back into Emma's eyes. Vivian smiled at him, a silent understanding passing between them. Then she turned back to Emma. "So, when do you start?" "Classes begin in January," Emma said excitedly. "There's a winter orientation program next month." "We'll have to celebrate," Vivian said. "Maybe dinner at the diner? Cherry pie on me?" "Actually," Jack stepped forward, "I was thinking maybe we could do dinner at our place. Emma makes a mean lasagna, and," he hesitated briefly, "there's plenty of room at our table for family." Vivian's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. Emma hugged her again, whispering, "Thank you." The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the newly renovated storefront on Main Street. Jack's old truck pulled up alongside Vivian's sleek car, and he couldn't help but smile at the contrast. Emma practically bounced out of the passenger seat, her acceptance letter still clutched in her hand like a precious treasure. Vivian stood by the entrance, dressed simply in jeans and a light blue sweater, a far cry from her usual corporate attire. Her face lit up when she saw them approach, but there was a hint of nervousness in her smile. "I wanted you both to be the first to see it," she said, fishing a key from her pocket. "Before the official opening next week." The glass doors opened with a gentle chime. Inside, the space was bright and airy, with high ceilings and exposed brick walls. Natural light streamed through tall windows, illuminating pristine white walls ready for artwork. "This is amazing!" Emma exclaimed, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. She wandered toward a row of easels set up near the windows. "It's just the beginning," Vivian explained, leading them through the main gallery. "We'll have classes for all ages, exhibition space for local artists, and scholarships for talented students who can't afford art supplies." Jack ran his hand along a smooth wooden workbench. "You did all this in a month?" "When you have the right motivation." Vivian paused, wringing her hands slightly. "There's something else I need to show you both." She led them down a short hallway to a set of double doors. Above them hung a simple bronze plaque that made Jack's breath catch in his throat. "The Sarah Harper Center for the Arts." Emma gasped softly beside him. Jack stood frozen, staring at his late wife's name. "I hope." Vivian's voice wavered slightly. "I hope it's okay. I should have asked first, but I wanted it to be a surprise." Sarah always believed in nurturing creativity, in giving people chances to grow. That's what this place is about. Jack couldn't speak. His vision blurred as he reached out to touch the letters of Sarah's name. "Dad?" Emma's hand slipped into his. "Mom would have loved this." "She would have," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "She really would have." Vivian opened the doors, revealing a sunny classroom space. Along one wall hung a series of black and white photographs, scenes from around Willow Creek, faces of local people, moments of daily life. In the center was a photograph Jack recognized. Sarah, much younger, sitting at her desk at the company where she and Vivian had worked. She was laughing at something off camera, her face bright with joy. "I kept this all these years," Vivian said softly. "It was taken the day she helped me prepare for my first major presentation. I was terrified, but she stayed late to coach me through it. She believed in me when no one else did." Emma moved closer to the wall of photos. "Is that why you believed in me?" "Partly," Vivian admitted. "But mostly because you have your mother's spirit, that same light, that same way of seeing beauty in everything." Jack watched his daughter trace her fingers along the frame of Sarah's photo. The ache in his chest wasn't just grief anymore, it was something else, something that felt like healing. "There's more?" Vivian continued, leading them through the classroom to a small office. "This is where we'll process scholarship applications. Every recipient will be called a Sarah Harper Fellow." On the desk sat a framed sketch, one of Emma's drawings of the town square, the one she'd done the day Vivian first took them to the art galleries. "Your drawing will be our first piece of permanent art," Vivian explained, "to remind us why we're here." Emma threw her arms around Vivian, hugging her tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "I'll give you a minute," Emma said suddenly, showing wisdom beyond her years. She slipped out of the office, leaving Jack and Vivian alone. The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken words. Jack looked around the small office, taking in the careful details, the warm colors, the comfortable chairs, the way the afternoon light made everything glow. "You didn't have to do all this," he said finally. "Yes, I did." Vivian's voice was firm, but gentle. "Not just for Sarah's memory, or for Emma, or even to make amends. I did it because this town showed me what really matters. What success really means." She paused, meeting his eyes. "You showed me." Jack felt something shift in his heart, like the last piece of a puzzle finally sliding into place. He reached for her hand, his larger one enfolding her smaller one. In that touch was understanding, forgiveness, and something more, a promise of possibilities neither of them had expected to find. He squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back, both of them standing in the warm light of Sarah's legacy and their shared future. The evening air carried a gentle warmth as Jack and Vivian sat on his front porch swing. Emma had gone inside to call her best friend about the art center news, leaving them alone with their thoughts and the rhythmic creaking of old chains. Sarah loved this swing, Jack said softly, his hand resting on the weathered wood. Used to sit out here for hours, especially when Emma was little. Vivian turned to him, her eyes gentle in the fading light. Tell me about her? The Sarah you knew, not just my former co-worker, but your wife, Emma's mother. Jack took a deep breath, looking out at the familiar yard where so many memories lived. She had this laugh that just filled up a room. Didn't matter how bad things got, she could always find something to smile about. He paused, a small grin tugging at his lips. Even that last year, when the bills were piling up after the layoff, she'd make games out of counting pennies with Emma. Turn it into an adventure instead of a hardship. That sounds exactly like her, Vivian said quietly. Even at work, she always lifted everyone's spirits. I remember this one time, during a particularly stressful quarter, she brought in these terrible homemade cookies. Oh Lord, Jack chuckled. Her famous rock, hard snickerdoodles? Yes, she insisted they were extra crunchy on purpose. We all ate them anyway because her heart was so obviously in it. They shared a laugh that settled into comfortable silence. The porch light flickered on automatically as dusk deepened around them. You know, Jack said slowly, I spent so long being angry about that layoff, blaming the faceless corporation that threw her aside. Then you showed up, and suddenly that anger had a target. He turned to face her fully. But Sarah. She never was angry, not once. Vivian's hands twisted in her lap. I didn't know then what I know now, that every business decision affects real people, real families. I was so focused on numbers, on survival. Sarah understood that, I think, Jack replied. She used to say that everyone's doing their best with what they know at the time. Some days I thought she was too forgiving. And now? Now I think maybe she was right all along. Jack's voice grew thoughtful. She'd want Emma to have every chance to chase her dreams. And she'd want me to. He trailed off, looking at Vivian with new clarity. To what? Vivian asked softly. To learn that holding on to hurt only hurts yourself more. Sarah knew that. Even at the end, when things were hardest, she kept telling me to promise I wouldn't let bitterness take root. Jack shook his head. Took me long enough to understand what she meant. Vivian wiped at her eyes. I wish I could tell her how sorry I am, how much I've learned since then. I think you're showing it, Jack said. Everything you've done for Emma, the art center, and Sarah's name, you're not just saying sorry, you're living it. A warm breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from Sarah's old garden. Vivian closed her eyes, breathing it in. Sarah planted those, Jack said, noticing. Said every house needs something that blooms in the dark, to remind us beauty doesn't stop just because we can't see it clearly. She was wise, Vivian murmured. Yeah, she was. Jack's voice grew tender. And she'd want us to honor her memory not by dwelling in the past, but by building something good from it. They sat quietly for a moment, letting the truth of those words settle between them. The stars were beginning to emerge, bright points of light in the deepening blue above. Jack. Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. What are we building here? He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Without words, he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like a new beginning, gentle, honest, and full of promise. When they finally parted, the stars had fully emerged, twinkling their approval from the vast canvas of night sky. It wasn't an ending to their story, but rather the start of a new chapter that honored the past while embracing the future, just as Sarah would have wanted. The autumn morning arrived, crisp and clear, painting Willow Creek in shades of gold and crimson. Jack Harper stood at the bus station, his hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets, watching Emma double-check her bags for the 10th time. The station was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of fallen leaves skittering across the concrete. Dad, are you sure I packed my good sketching pencils? Emma fretted, her fingers nervously playing with the locket around her neck. "Right side pocket of your blue bag," Jack replied with a gentle smile. "Just where you put them last night." Vivian Clark stood nearby, elegant as always, but with a softness in her expression that few people got to see. She'd brought Emma a travel care package, new art supplies, healthy snacks, and a handwritten note that Emma had immediately tucked away, clearly saving it for later. "The campus store has everything you might need," Vivian assured her, smoothing a wrinkle from Emma's coat. "And remember, you can call any time." Emma nodded, but Jack could see the slight trembling of her chin. His daughter, so grown up in her new wool coat and carefully styled hair, suddenly looked very young again. He pulled her into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm scared, Dad," she whispered against his chest. "That's okay, sweetheart," he murmured. "Being scared means you're about to do something really brave." The bus pulled into the station with a gentle hiss of brakes. Emma's grip on Jack tightened for a moment before she stepped back, wiping quickly at her eyes. She turned to Vivian, who opened her arms without hesitation. "Thank you," Emma said, her voice muffled against Vivian's shoulder, "for everything." "You earned this, Emma," Vivian replied firmly. "Every bit of it. Now go show them what you can do." They watched as Emma handed her ticket to the driver and climbed aboard. She found a window seat and pressed her hand against the glass, waving as the bus slowly pulled away. Jack kept waving until the bus disappeared around the corner, taking his little girl toward her dreams. The station felt emptier somehow. Jack stood there, staring down the road long after the bus was gone. He felt Vivian's presence beside him, steady and understanding. "She's going to be amazing," Vivian said softly. "She already is," Jack replied, his voice rough with emotion. They walked back to his truck in comfortable silence. The morning sun caught the remaining leaves on the trees, making them glow like stained glass. A light breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and approaching winter. As they reached the truck, Vivian slipped her hand into his. Her fingers were warm against his palm, and he found himself marveling at how natural it felt now. How far they'd come from that rain-soaked night when he'd first found her stumbling along the road. Jack looked at their joined hands, then at the woman beside him. Vivian's hair caught the sunlight, and her eyes held a peace he'd never seen in those early days. She'd let go of her corporate armor, choosing instead to run her nonprofit from a small office in town. The Sarah Harper Center for the Arts was already changing lives, just as Sarah would have wanted. "What are you thinking?" Vivian asked, catching his thoughtful expression. Jack squeezed her hand gently. "About paths," he said. "About how sometimes the hardest ones lead us exactly where we need to be." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It doesn't matter where you've been, it matters where you're going, and who's walking with you." Vivian's eyes grew soft with understanding. She stepped closer, resting her free hand against his chest. "And where are we going, Jack Harper?" "Forward," he said simply. "Together." They climbed into the truck, the familiar creak of the door, a comfortable sound in the morning quiet. As Jack started the engine, a gust of wind sent a cascade of golden leaves swirling around them. He could almost hear Emma's laughter in the rustle of those leaves, could almost see her childhood self chasing them across their yard on countless autumn days. The town spread out before them as they drove, its streets lined with trees in their fall glory. Past the hardware store where he still worked part-time, past the diner where they'd shared so many conversations over coffee and pie, past the art center where Emma's first painting hung proudly in the gallery. Every corner held memories, but now they also held promises of new ones to come. Vivian hummed softly along with the radio, her hand still entwined with his on the seat between them. The morning sun painted everything in honey-gold light, making the world seem soft and full of possibility. Leaves danced in their wake as they drove through the familiar streets of Willow Creek, heading home together. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Harper, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.